What does it mean when something disappears so slowly that no one calls it an ending? Not with a single sound, not with a sky on fire, but with a gradual thinning, a quiet absence, a space where something once moved, once breathed, once mattered, and now does not. History has always been drawn to noise, wars, collapses, cataclysms, yet some of the most profound losses arrive without spectacle, settling into the background like dusk. And, before you let your body sink fully into this comfort, take just a very small moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if there is truly something in what I'm saying that makes you want to stay a little longer. If you wish, you may share the place and time where you're listening. I am always curious about the small points of light drifting together tonight. There is a quiet disagreement embedded deep within the scientific record. It does not announce itself loudly. It sits between charts and footnotes, between cautious language and softened conclusions. On one side, there is an accumulation of data, numbers that rise too fast, species that vanish too often, ecosystems that unravel in patterns once thought impossible outside of catastrophe. On the other side, there is restraint, a reluctance to speak of the present as if it were already history. The phrase, sixth Great Extinction, exists, but it is rarely allowed to linger. When it appears, it is often framed as a possibility, a future risk, a warning. Yet the mechanisms it describes are not waiting patiently ahead. They are already in motion, woven into daily life so thoroughly that they have become nearly invisible. Forests still stand, oceans still glitter, cities hum, and so the mind resists the idea that anything truly final could be happening now. Past mass extinctions announce themselves clearly in stone, a sudden absence of pollen, a sharp line where life collapses into scarcity. The end of the Permian, the close of the Cretaceous, these moments are etched into the planet with brutal clarity. They are finished stories. The present, however, has no such boundary. It is unfinished, unfolding, and therefore easier to deny. What makes this moment unsettling is not only the scale of loss, but the way it slips through language. Species do not vanish all at once. They become rare, then isolated, then functionally gone long before the last individual dies. Coral reefs bleach, recover slightly, bleach again. Insects decline by percentages small enough to ignore, until the air itself feels emptier. The change does not feel like destruction, it feels like normalization. There is also the problem of witnesses. Previous extinctions left no one behind to wonder what had happened. This one does. Humans are present, watching, recording, modelling. And yet presence does not guarantee clarity. The systems used to understand the crisis are the same systems that benefit from its continuation. Economic growth, resource extraction, technological acceleration, these are not external forces acting upon humanity. They are extensions of it. Some researchers point to extinction rates hundreds of times higher than the natural background level. Others argue for caution, suggesting uncertainty in baselines, gaps in data, incomplete monitoring. Both positions draw from evidence. Both are technically correct within their frames. And in that narrow space between certainty and doubt, delay becomes possible. What is rarely addressed directly is how unusual this situation truly is. A mass extinction driven not by volcanic fire or cosmic impact, but by one species altering atmosphere, chemistry and climate in a geological instant. Not out of malice, but momentum. Not from a single decision, but from millions of small, ordinary ones. There is no singular villain in this story, which makes it difficult to tell. No event that can be isolated, blamed, and then moved past. Instead, there is a gradual tightening, a convergence of signals, a sense that something ancient is being interrupted mid-sentence. Even the fossil record of the future will tell an ambiguous tale, a layer marked by plastic polymers, a spike in carbon isotopes, a sudden rearrangement of life forms. But interpretation will depend on who is left to read it. The question lingers quietly beneath all others. If this is already an extinction, why does it feel so unfinished? And if it is unfinished, at what point does recognition arrive too late to matter? The stone remembers what language often refuses to hold. Long before any record written by human hands, the planet learned how to erase itself, not gently, not politely, but with an efficiency that still unsettles those who study the scars. 5 times at least, life on Earth narrowed so severely that survival itself became an exception. And each time the cause arrived without intention, without moral weight. Fire from the sky, poison rising from the ground, oceans losing their breath. The Ordovician seas cooled until life could no longer follow them. The Devonian waters suffocated under their own abundance. The Permian burned so thoroughly that nearly everything living vanished with it, leaving a silence that lasted millions of years. The Triassic cracked under instability. The Cretaceous ended in dust and shadow. These events are not debated in principle. Their traces are firm, layered, undeniable. They exist as boundaries, before and after, etched into limestone and shale. What unsettles researchers is not their violence, but their finality. Each extinction was sudden in geological terms, yet still slow enough that no single moment could be named as the end. Even catastrophe stretches across centuries when measured by the planet's clock, and still, when viewed from a distance, each appears clean, almost precise, a line drawn across the story of life. The present offers no such line. Instead, it stretches thin. It bleeds outward. It resists definition. When scientists compare today's biodiversity loss to those earlier collapses, they do so carefully. Numbers are weighted, assumptions are softened. Words like possibly, potentially, and projected are favoured over certainty. It is not dishonesty. It is caution. Yet caution has its own gravity. It pulls conclusions back just enough to keep them from landing. The difficulty lies in comparison. Previous mass extinctions unfolded without witnesses who could argue over terminology. There was no debate over whether the Permian event had truly begun while it was happening. There were no committees, no funding constraints, no economic consequences attached to acknowledgement. The planet simply changed, and life either followed or disappeared. Today the data accumulates differently. Amphibians decline first, then insects, then birds. Large mammals follow, one by one, their disappearances spaced far enough apart to seem unrelated. Each loss is explainable on its own. Habitat fragmentation, disease, climate shifts, overexploitation. But together, they form a pattern that looks uncomfortably familiar to anyone who studies deep time. The fossil record shows that biodiversity rarely declines evenly. It unravels asymmetrically. Certain niches collapse early. Others linger until the system can no longer support them. That same unevenness defines the present. Tropical regions lose species faster. Island ecosystems fracture quickly. Specialists vanish before generalists. The architecture of life weakens from the inside. And yet, the planet does not appear dead. This is the illusion that protects the present from comparison. Forests still stand tall. Oceans still teem, at least near the surface. The background noise of a life continues, masking the thinning beneath it. But the past teaches a quiet lesson here. Extinction does not announce itself when it begins. It becomes obvious only when it is nearly complete. Geologists have learned that the most devastating extinctions were not necessarily the most dramatic in appearance at first. The Permian extinction, the largest of them all, may have unfolded through cascading feedbacks rather than a single instant of destruction. Warming oceans released methane. Acidification spread. Oxygen vanished from the depths. Life collapsed not from one blow, but from the accumulation of conditions that made survival impossible. This matters because accumulation is harder to fear. A meteor invites awe, a supervolcano commands respect. But incremental change blends into routine. It becomes background, something adjusted to rather than confronted. The planet's past suggests that this is precisely how collapse often proceeds. Another discomforting parallel emerges when timescales are compressed. What once took tens of thousands of years is now unfolding within centuries. Atmospheric carbon levels shift faster than many species can adapt. Temperature bands migrate faster than ecosystems can follow. Evolution, once given time to respond, now stumbles. Still, the argument persists that this moment is different, that technology will intervene, that adaptation will accelerate, that the comparison to past extinctions is melodramatic. And perhaps there is truth there. The present has no precedent. Never before has a single species altered planetary systems so comprehensively, while also possessing the capacity to observe its own impact. But observation does not guarantee interruption. The planet's history suggests that systems resist correction once certain thresholds are crossed. Feedback loops strengthen, stability erodes. Change becomes self-reinforcing. In previous extinctions, life did not recover quickly. It reorganized slowly, unevenly, often into forms unrecognizable to what came before. The question that lingers beneath the comparison is not whether the sixth extinction resembles the others exactly. It does not. The question is whether resemblance is even required. If the outcome aligns, does the cause matter to those who vanish? Deep time offers no comfort here. It shows resilience, yes, but only after loss. Only after silence, only after entire branches of life end without ceremony. The present remains suspended between recognition and refusal, between data and denial, between knowing and naming. And somewhere beneath the surface of this hesitation lies a more unsettling thought. If previous extinctions were visible only in hindsight, what would it mean to be living inside one, and still arguing over whether it has begun? Evidence does not arrive all at once. It accumulates quietly, settling into places few people ever visit. In laboratories, drawers hold fragments of bone no larger than a fingernail. In sediment cores pulled from the ocean floor, thin bands of colour record centuries of change compressed into millimetres. In long-term ecological surveys, columns of numbers stretch across decades, revealing trends that no single year could expose. None of these elements feel dramatic on their own. Together, they form a pressure that is difficult to ignore. One of the most unsettling features of the present moment is how closely its biological signals resemble those that appeared just before collapse in the deep past. In the fossil record, mass extinctions are rarely marked by an immediate disappearance of all life. Instead, there is an early narrowing. Genetic diversity contracts, population ranges shrink, ecosystems lose redundancy, species become vulnerable long before they vanish. That same narrowing is visible now. Coral reefs offer a clear example. These structures are often mistaken for static landscapes, but they are living systems built slowly by organisms exquisitely sensitive to temperature and chemistry. When ancient reefs disappeared from the fossil record, they did so after repeated episodes of stress, not a single blow. Today's reefs follow a similar pattern. Bleaching events arrive closer together. Recovery periods shorten. Species that once dominated quietly give way to simpler, less stable forms. The reef still exists, but its memory of resilience erodes. On land, the signal repeats. Large mammals persist in reduced pockets, isolated from one another by roads, farms and cities. Genetic bottlenecks form. In the past, such fragmentation often preceded extinction, even when total numbers appeared stable. A species does not need to be rare everywhere to be doomed. It only needs to lose its ability to reconnect. Insects tell a subtler story. Their bodies fossilize poorly, leaving gaps in the deep record. Yet where evidence exists, it shows that insect populations collapse rapidly when ecosystems destabilize. Modern surveys echo this vulnerability. Declines measured in percentages seem small at first, 10%, 20, 30, but insects operate on thresholds. Pollination networks fail quietly, food webs loosen, the absence is felt indirectly, long before it is named. Geology adds another layer of unease. Chemical markers associated with past extinctions are appearing again. Rising carbon dioxide leaves a recognizable signature in sediments. Ocean acidification alters the shells of microscopic organisms, just as it did during earlier warming events. Oxygen-depleted zones expand, creating marine dead spaces reminiscent of those linked to ancient collapses. None of these signals alone declares a mass extinction. It is their alignment that unsettles. Critics often point out that extinction rates are difficult to calculate in real time. They are correct. The background rate itself is an estimate. Fossil records are incomplete. Modern monitoring favours charismatic or economically relevant species. Much of life remains uncounted. These uncertainties are real, and they matter. Yet uncertainty does not imply safety. In past extinctions, scientists now know that warning signs were present long before the final collapse became obvious in the record. Ecosystems destabilized in stages. Certain groups declined first. Others followed once critical functions failed. The lag between cause and consequence stretched across generations. What makes the present especially difficult to interpret is that many of its drivers operate invisibly. Climate change does not strike evenly. It shifts probabilities. Heat waves become more likely. Droughts last longer. Storms intensify. No single event can be blamed for extinction. Yet together they reshape survival itself. There is also the matter of scale. Previous extinctions were global, but their effects varied by region. Some refugees persisted longer than others. Today's human-altered landscape complicates this pattern. Potential refugees are fragmented or degraded. Migration routes are blocked. Adaptation pathways close before they can be tested. Still, the absence of a clear boundary allows doubt to linger. Forests regrow after fires. Species adapt in unexpected ways. Life has surprised observers before. These truths coexist with the evidence of decline, creating a tension that resists resolution. What the fossil record ultimately teaches is patience, not reassurance. Recovery after mass extinction took millions of years. The forms that returned were not the ones that vanished. Evolution filled the silence with experiments, not restorations. Stability once lost was not reclaimed quickly. The present moment stands at an uncomfortable intersection. Enough evidence exists to recognize a pattern. Enough uncertainty remains to postpone judgment. The record is still being written, layer by layer, observation by observation, and beneath the data lies a quieter discomfort. If future scientists were to examine this period without access to our debates, without our hesitations, what would they see in the stone? A brief anomaly? A turning point? Or the opening chapters of another long silence? The question remains suspended, unresolved. At what point does evidence stop being a warning and become a memorial? Long before cities learned to glow at night, before engines rewrote distance and speed, something began to disappear. The end of the last ice age did not arrive with a single sound. It loosened its grip gradually. Glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, forests reclaimed tundra. To human memory, this transition feels distant and gentle, a natural turning of epochs. Yet scattered across continents, another story unfolded alongside the warming, a quiet vanishing of giants. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, woolly rhinoceroses. Creatures that had endured multiple climate swings suddenly fail to pass into the present. Their bones remain embedded in permafrost, in peat bogs, in caves and riverbanks, as if caught mid-step. For decades, researchers debated the cause. Climate change offered one explanation. human hunting another. Neither alone seemed sufficient. Together they formed an uncomfortable convergence. What makes this episode unsettling is not merely the loss itself, but its timing. Many of these species survived previous warm periods. They adapted to shifting vegetation and temperature, yet their disappearance aligns closely with the spread of modern humans across new lands. The pattern repeats with eerie consistency. Humans arrive, large animals decline, ecosystems reorganize. This does not require malice to be true. Early humans did not set out to empty the world. They followed opportunity, food, safety. But the tools they carried, fire, coordinated hunting, landscape modification, altered environments faster than large, slow-reproducing species could respond. A single mammoth fed a community for weeks. Efficiency became impact. In some regions, the collapse was swift. In others, it stretched across centuries, long enough to blur cause and effect. Yet the result was similar. Entire functional roles vanished. Seed dispersers, landscape shapers, keystone grazers. The world grew quieter, not suddenly, but irreversibly. The Holocene, often described as a period of climatic stability, carries this contradiction at its core. Stable temperatures did not guarantee stable life. Human presence introduced a new variable, one that did not reset with seasons or migrations. It accumulated knowledge, it remembered, it expanded. What remains debated is the scale of responsibility. Some argue that climate stress weakened populations first, leaving them vulnerable to hunting. Others emphasize overkill models, pointing to archaeological sites where human arrival and megafaunal extinction overlap almost too precisely to dismiss. Still, others suggest disease vectors carried unknowingly by humans played a role. The truth likely resides in combination, not singular cause. What matters more than resolution is implication. This was not a mass extinction by geological standards. Life did not collapse globally. Oceans did not suffocate. Forests did not vanish wholesale. Yet it marked something new. For the first time, a single species influenced extinction patterns across multiple continents within a compressed time frame. It was an early rehearsal. The disappearance of megafauna reshaped ecosystems in ways that are still felt. Grasslands changed without large grazers. Forest composition shifted. Fire regimes altered. Some plants evolved in partnership with animals that no longer existed, leaving behind fruits too large, seeds too heavy, strategies suddenly obsolete, ecological memory fractured, and yet this loss rarely occupies the center of historical imagination. It sits in the background, framed as prehistory, as inevitability, as collateral to progress. The narrative softens its edges. It treats extinction as something already completed, safely distant. But this framing obscures continuity. The methods changed, the speed increased, the scale expanded, yet the underlying dynamic persisted. Expansion without pause, resource use without full accounting, landscapes reshaped faster than life could adapt. The Holocene extinctions were not an anomaly, they were a beginning. Some scholars suggest that this moment marks the true start of the Anthropocene, not with industry, but with the first widespread ecological restructuring driven by humans. Long before smokestacks, the planet had begun responding to a new kind of pressure. Still, this idea remains contested. Naming a geological epoch carries weight. It implies responsibility. It reframes humans not as passengers, but as forces. And forces, once recognized, invite judgment. There is a discomfort in tracing today's losses back to such ancient origins. It disrupts the idea that the present crisis emerged suddenly, from modern excess alone. It suggests instead a long arc of interaction, escalating gradually, normalized over generations. The extinction of the giants did not trigger alarm because there was no global consciousness to hold it. No shared memory to mourn collectively. Each loss was local. Each silence absorbed quietly into myth. But patterns do not require witnesses to exist. The question that lingers from this early chapter is not whether humans caused these extinctions entirely. It is whether the mechanisms set in motion ever truly stopped. If the first great losses occurred when our tools were simple and our numbers small, what does that imply for a world now shaped by billions, armed with technologies that move faster than feedback can follow? The past does not accuse. It does not warn explicitly. It simply leaves traces, and those traces suggest that the present did not begin recently at all, but has been unfolding for far longer than we like to admit. There is a moment when quantity becomes something else entirely. In the natural rhythms of Earth's history, extinction is slow. Even catastrophe unfolds with patience when measured against deep time. Species rise and fall, climates shift, oceans advance and retreat. Life adjusts, retreats, experiments again. This tempo once defined the boundaries of possibility. Adaptation had time to breathe. What distinguishes the present is not merely loss, but acceleration. The numbers themselves are unassuming at first glance. A fraction here, a percentage there. A species declared threatened, then endangered, then quietly removed from surveys altogether. Each entry seems manageable. Each loss appears contained. Yet when these changes are layered over time, the pattern sharpens. The rate itself begins to speak. Biologists refer to a background extinction rate, a slow, constant disappearance woven into evolution itself. Species vanish as others emerge. The ledger balances. Against this baseline, the present diverges sharply. Estimates suggest extinction is occurring tens to hundreds of times, faster than what would be expected without human influence. Some projections extend further, but even the most conservative calculations point toward an anomaly. Speed alters everything. In earlier extinctions, environmental pressure mounted until systems failed. Today, pressure multiplies faster than feedback can respond. Habitats fragment in decades. Temperature zones shift in years. Chemical compositions of oceans change within a human lifetime. Evolution, once granted millennia, is asked to adapt in generations. There are signs of resilience, and they are often celebrated. Certain species expand their ranges, others alter behavior. Urban wildlife adapts to concrete and light. These examples are real, but they also mislead. They highlight survivors while obscuring the vast number that cannot adjust at the same pace. Generalists thrive. Specialists fade. Diversity thins even as life appears busy. Speed also fragments responsibility. When loss unfolds gradually, blame diffuses. No single action appears decisive. No moment feels final. A wetland drained here. A forest thinned there. A river warmed by fractions of a degree. Each choice feels small enough to justify. Together they accumulate into something no one intended and no one fully controls. This is where comparison to past extinctions becomes most uncomfortable. Those events were violent but brief in geological terms. Their causes were external. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, runaway greenhouse effects triggered by forces beyond intention. The present is internal. It emerges from patterns of living normalized over centuries. Industrialization compressed what once took millennia into decades. Fossil carbon, stored across deep time, was returned to the atmosphere in an instant. Landscapes reshaped faster than soil could regenerate. Oceans absorbed heat and acid without pause. The planet did not resist. It responded exactly as physics predicted. Yet prediction does not equal comprehension. One of the great difficulties of this moment is that its consequences lag behind its causes. Carbon emitted today commits the future to warming decades from now. Species pushed to the edge may persist invisibly until one more stress tips them into absence. The delay allows denial to thrive. Cause and effect feel disconnected. Past extinction show similar lags. In the fossil record, the final disappearance of species often trails the initial disruption by thousands of years. Ecosystems stagger before they fall. That staggering phase is easy to misinterpret as stability. Speed also reshapes perception of scale. Because loss is distributed unevenly, it rarely feels global. One forest recovers. One fishery rebounds temporarily. One species is rediscovered. These moments offer comfort, suggesting reversibility. But deep time reminds us that recovery and collapse can coexist briefly. Regrowth does not negate decline if underlying pressures remain. The present differs again in one critical way. Human systems are tightly coupled. Economic networks span continents. Food production relies on narrow ecological margins. When biodiversity erodes, resilience declines. Systems become efficient but brittle. The loss of redundancy goes unnoticed until something breaks. In previous extinctions, life reorganized after collapse. The survivors inherited a simpler world. Today, collapse would not unfold in isolation from civilization. Human structures depend on ecological stability, even as they undermine it. This interdependence introduces uncertainty that has no precedent. Some argue that technology will outrun consequence, that monitoring, intervention, and adaptation will smooth the curve. There is partial truth here. Conservation has slowed loss in certain regions. Species have been saved from the brink. Damage has been mitigated. These efforts matter, but speed undermines even intention. Interventions require time to scale. Policies lag behind data. Data lags behind reality. Reality moves faster still. The gap between response and need widens quietly. What deep time suggests is not inevitability, but fragility. Systems appear stable until they are not. Thresholds are crossed silently. Feedback loops strengthen unseen. When change becomes obvious to everyone at once, it is often because options have narrowed. The discomfort of the present lies in its ambiguity. The rate is alarming, but the outcome is not yet sealed. The window remains open even as it narrows. This tension produces paralysis. Acting too soon feels extreme. Acting too late feels inevitable. Speed denies comfort in both directions. If this were a catastrophe of the past, its aftermath would already be written in stone, but it is not. It unfolds in real time, shaped by decisions too ordinary to feel historic. The absence of spectacle makes it easier to sleep through. Yet the numbers continue to rise, quietly, patiently, without pause. And beneath them lingers a question that deep time cannot answer for us. When a process moves faster than recognition, faster than adaptation, faster than responsibility itself, what remains of choice? And at what point does speed turn possibility into memory? Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of expectation. There are places where the change announces itself not through statistics, but through feeling. A forest where footsteps seem louder than they once were. A night sky where insects no longer press against the dark in invisible numbers. A shoreline where the tide still comes in but leaves less behind. These impressions are difficult to measure, and so they are often dismissed. Yet they echo a pattern known well in ecological history. The quiet arrives first. Biologists sometimes speak of shifting baselines. Each generation accepts the world it inherits as normal, unaware of what has already been lost. What feels intact today would have felt impoverished to someone living a century earlier. What feels abundant now may feel hollow to those who come after. This gradual recalibration dulls alarm. Decline becomes familiar. Absence becomes expected. In the fossil record, there are intervals where diversity collapses not dramatically but diffusely. Species do not vanish all at once. They thin out. Their interactions weaken. Ecosystems persist in name while losing complexity. Function disappears before form. By the time extinction is undeniable, the system has already been empty for a long time. Modern ecology mirrors this pattern closely. Bird populations decline quietly, their songs thinning year by year. Pollinators vanish unevenly, leaving crops dependent on fewer interactions. Fish stocks fluctuate until variability itself becomes instability. Each change is subtle enough to escape urgency. Together, they rewire the living world. What makes this silence especially difficult to confront is that it does not feel like loss. It feels like calm. Noise has always signaled danger. Silence suggests safety. Yet in ecological terms, silence often means collapse is already underway. A healthy system hums with redundancy. It overflows with interactions. When those interactions fade, the system becomes fragile even if it appears peaceful. The deep past offers parallel moments. Before major extinctions, ecosystems often entered phases of low variability. Fewer species dominated larger niches. Diversity dropped, but biomass remained. To an observer, life would have seemed stable, productive even. Only later did instability reveal itself, when shocks arrived that the simplified system could no longer absorb. This simplification is visible now. Agricultural landscapes favour a narrow range of species. Oceans support fewer dominant fish populations. Urban environments reward adaptability over specialisation. The world becomes efficient, streamlined, quieter. Efficiency feels like progress, but evolution values excess. It depends on redundancy, multiple paths, overlapping roles, wasted energy that becomes resilience in times of stress. When efficiency replaces diversity, stability becomes brittle. There is also a sensory dimension to this loss that rarely enters formal discussion. Humans evolved within dense ecological soundscapes, wind through leaves layered with insects, birds, amphibians. These sounds shaped perception, orientation, even emotion. Their gradual disappearance alters experience in ways that resist articulation. Anxiety rises without clear cause. Attention shifts. The world feels subtly less alive. In ancient extinctions, no one recorded such sensations, but the aftermath suggests they would have been profound. Silence marks the transition between abundance and aftermath. It is the pause before rearrangement. What complicates the present further is that silence is uneven. Some regions remain loud. Tropical forests still buzz. Certain reefs still glow with life. These refuges become symbols of hope, and rightly so. But they can also mislead, suggesting that loss elsewhere is exaggerated or temporary. Deep time suggests caution here. Refuges often persist briefly before collapsing themselves. Once broader systems fail, isolation buys time, not immunity. The modern world amplifies this unevenness. Media focuses on visible catastrophes and spectacular recoveries, while gradual thinning escapes attention. A species declared extinct makes headlines. A species reduced to a fraction of its range does not. Yet from an ecological perspective, the latter often signals the more important change. Silence also complicates memory. When something disappears quietly, it is forgotten quietly. Names vanish, knowledge fades, relationships dissolve without ceremony. In past extinctions, entire evolutionary lineages ended without record. Today, documentation exists, but attention does not always follow. Databases fill as awareness thins. There is an uncomfortable intimacy to this phase of loss. It unfolds within lived experience, but without drama. It asks for perception rather than reaction, for patience rather than urgency. And patience is not a trait cultivated by systems built on speed. Some philosophers argue that modern humanity struggles with slow catastrophes. Events that lack a clear beginning, middle, and end resist narrative. They feel abstract. They do not compel immediate action. Ecological silence fits this pattern precisely. It unfolds beneath thresholds of concern. Yet thresholds exist, even if they are invisible. In ancient systems, once interaction networks fell below a certain density, collapse accelerated rapidly. Recovery pathways closed. What followed was not a gentle decline, but a sudden reorganization into something simpler, harsher, less forgiving. The present has not yet reached that point, or perhaps it has, unevenly, in places not widely noticed. Some ecosystems may already be past return, even as others remain vibrant. This unevenness creates a dangerous illusion. As long as some places remain loud with life, the silence elsewhere feels negotiable, temporary, reversible. Deep time offers no guarantee of reversal. What it does offer is a pattern. Silence is not the end. It is the threshold. It is the moment when loss stops announcing itself and begins to settle into structure, when absence becomes architecture. The question that lingers in this quiet is not whether the world will change. It always has. The question is whether those who live within the silence will recognize it for what it is before it becomes the only sound left. Names carry weight long before they carry meaning. At some point, the present needed a word for itself, not a description, but a frame, a way to place the moment into a larger order of things. And so a proposal emerged, cautious at first, then persistent. A suggestion that the stable chapter following the last ice age had quietly closed, that something else had begun. Anthropocene. The word did not arrive gently. It unsettled geologists, historians, philosophers alike. To name an epoch is to mark a boundary in stone. It implies permanence. It demands evidence that will endure long after debate fades. And yet the pressure to name this moment persisted, not because the criteria were fully met, but because the absence of a name felt like avoidance. The Anthropocene suggests that humans have become a geological force, not metaphorically, but materially. Rivers rerouted, sediments altered, atmospheric chemistry reshaped. A thin layer of plastic and radionuclides spread across the planet, forming a signature unlike any before. Future strata, if read, would notice something abrupt, but the word also carries accusation. If this is the Anthropocene, then responsibility cannot be outsourced to fate or fire from the sky. It rests within patterns of behaviour, production, and belief. This implication unsettles institutions built on neutrality. Science prefers description over judgment. History prefers distance. The present offers neither. Resistance followed. Some argue the term was premature. Others suggested alternatives. Capitalocene, emphasizing economic systems rather than humanity as a whole. Plantationocene, pointing to specific histories of extraction and domination. Each name reframed causality. Each shifted the locus of blame. The debate itself became revealing. What was truly at stake was not stratigraphy, but narrative control. To name an era is to define its story. It determines what is remembered, what is emphasized, what is softened. In past extinctions, no such debate existed. The planet changed without consultation. This time, the changing world is accompanied by argument. There is an unease in acknowledging that knowledge systems themselves participate in delay. Scientific caution, while essential, can blur urgency. Economic metrics prioritize growth over stability. Political cycles favor immediacy over long arcs. Even language hesitates, framing loss as risk rather than reality. The Anthropocene debate exposes this hesitation. If the epoch has begun, then the sixth extinction is not an external threat approaching from the future. It is embedded within the present. It unfolds alongside routine. It is shaped by policies, habits, incentives so normalized they feel invisible. To accept this reframes extinction from an event to a condition. Yet conditions lack drama. They do not demand response in the way disasters do. They invite management, optimization, adaptation. These responses, while useful, often avoid confrontation with scale. They treat symptoms while leaving structures intact. Deep time suggests that structure matters more than intention. Another layer of discomfort lies in distribution. Humanity is not a single force acting uniformly. Contributions to planetary change are uneven. Impacts are uneven. Vulnerabilities are uneven. The Anthropocene risks flattening these differences into a single story, smoothing over histories of power and imbalance. This critique carries weight, but it also risks paralysis. If responsibility is too diffuse, action dissolves. If it is too narrow, denial flourishes. Naming becomes political terrain, contested not for accuracy alone, but for consequence. What follows a name? Regulation, accountability, change. The fossil record will not care what we called this moment. It will record outcomes, not debates. Layers will accumulate regardless of terminology, but for those living within the process, names shape perception. They determine whether loss feels personal or abstract. Some scholars suggest that the reluctance to finalise the Anthropocene reflects an older pattern. In previous eras, societies struggled to name their own endings. Collapse is easier to recognise in hindsight. While unfolding, it masquerades as transition. Civilizations have fallen before without acknowledging their trajectory. Soil eroded gradually. Water systems failed incrementally. Political structures persisted long after ecological foundations weakened. History records their endings as sudden, but the process was slow. The present echoes this ambiguity. We stand within overlapping systems, ecological, economic, cultural, each adapting unevenly. Some stabilise temporarily, others destabilise quietly. The sixth extinction, if it is named at all, resists being framed as a singular phenomenon. It threads through everything, making it harder to isolate, harder to confront. The act of naming an epoch asks a deeper question. At what point does awareness alter trajectory? Does recognition change outcome, or merely description? Deep time offers no example where naming alone reversed collapse, but it does show moments where perception shifted too late to matter. Perhaps the unease surrounding the Anthropocene reflects an intuition that words are trailing reality, that the change has already outrun classification, that by the time consensus forms, the process it names will be well advanced. There's also the quiet fear that once named, the epoch becomes normalised, managed, incorporated into policy documents and forecasts, something acknowledged but not resisted, a category rather than a crisis. The debate continues in committees and journals, while the planet continues without waiting. Species decline, systems thin, silence spreads unevenly. None of this pauses for terminology. The unresolved tension lingers. Whether or not the Anthropocene is formally recognised, the forces it describes remain active. The sixth extinction does not require a name to proceed. It requires only momentum. And so the question shifts subtly. Not whether we have entered a new epoch, but whether epochs can be recognised from within. Whether a species capable of naming itself as a force can also choose to become something else. Every story survives by choosing what it can afford to forget. Knowledge does not vanish abruptly. It erodes at the edges, softened by repetition, reframed by necessity. Over time, what remains feels inevitable, even when it is the product of countless small omissions. The story of the present extinction is shaped by this erosion, not through denial but through management. Institutions prefer continuity, education systems favour clarity, media rewards immediacy. Together they create a rhythm that struggles to hold slow, distributed truths. A crisis that unfolds without spectacle becomes difficult to sustain in public consciousness. Attention drifts. Urgency thins. The story narrows until it fits familiar shapes. This narrowing has consequences. The sixth extinction is often presented as a series of isolated problems: deforestation here, overfishing there, climate impacts elsewhere, each framed as a challenge to be addressed independently. Solutions follow the same pattern: targeted, technical, bounded. Reforestation programs, marine reserves, emissions targets. These efforts matter, but their framing fragments the underlying continuity of loss. What becomes difficult to articulate is the systemic nature of the change. That biodiversity decline is not merely a byproduct of specific actions, but an expression of deeper structures, economic incentives that reward extraction, political systems that prioritize short horizons, cultural narratives that equate growth with success. These structures are not hidden, they are simply normalized. In earlier eras, dominant institutions shaped historical memory deliberately. Empires curated chronicles. Religious authorities preserved some texts while allowing others to fade. The control of narrative served stability. Today, control operates less through censorship than through saturation. Too many stories, too much data, too little coherence. Scientific knowledge itself becomes vulnerable under this weight. Research is produced faster than it can be integrated. Findings accumulate without synthesis. Specialists speak fluently within narrow domains, while the larger pattern remains diffuse. No single discipline owns the story of extinction. As a result, responsibility disperses. There is also a subtle emotional regulation at play. Messages about irreversible loss provoke discomfort, anxiety, grief. These responses are difficult to sustain without resolution. To cope, narratives soften edges. They emphasize resilience, innovation, hope. These elements are not false, but when overemphasized, they dull the recognition of scale. Deep time does not offer comfort in this regard. It shows that resilience follows collapse, not prevention. Life returns after extinctions, but not quickly, and not as it was. This truth sits uneasily within systems designed to reassure. The language of sustainability illustrates this tension. To sustain implies maintenance, continuity, balance. It suggests that systems can be optimized without fundamental change. In some contexts, this is accurate. In others, it masks the need for transformation. The planet's history suggests that once thresholds are crossed, optimization no longer applies. Systems reorganize or fail, yet the dominant narrative resists this implication. It frames the present as a challenge to be managed, not a trajectory to be altered. This framing shapes policy, investment, education. It narrows imagination. Control of narrative does not require conspiracy. It emerges naturally from alignment of interests. Economic systems reward predictability. Political systems reward stability. Cultural systems reward familiarity. Acknowledging the sixth extinction as a present reality threatens all three. It introduces uncertainty that cannot be easily priced, legislated, or narrated. In the fossil record, there is no evidence of debate preceding collapse. Life did not argue its way into extinction. It responded to conditions. Today's debate occurs because humans are both agents and observers. This dual role creates friction. Observation invites reflection. Agency invites defense. Some scholars argue that modern society struggles with grief on a planetary scale. Mourning requires acknowledgement of finality. It disrupts productivity. It demands pause. In a system built on motion, grief becomes inconvenient. Loss is therefore reframed as risk, challenge, opportunity. Anything but ending. This reframing extends into education. Textbooks present extinctions as completed events, safely contained in the past. The present crisis is discussed cautiously, often with emphasis on uncertainty or future projection. Students learn about the dinosaurs with clarity, but about current loss with qualifiers. The effect is subtle but enduring. The present feels provisional. The past feels real. Media reinforces this divide. Extinction becomes a headline only when it crosses a symbolic threshold. The last individual, the final declaration. The long decline preceding that moment remains invisible. Attention spikes briefly, then moves on. The system learns that sustained focus on gradual loss does not perform well. The result is a collective blind spot. This blind spot is not empty. It is filled with partial truths, competing narratives, and managed optimism. It allows daily life to proceed uninterrupted. It allows growth to continue unchallenged. It allows the sixth extinction to unfold without being fully named. Deep time suggests that such blind spots are not unique. Past civilizations failed to perceive slow environmental degradation until collapse accelerated beyond control. Their records often reflect surprise at endings that were long in the making. Hindsight clarifies what contemporaries could not see clearly. The difference now is awareness. Data exists, patterns are visible, The blind spot persists not from ignorance, but from friction between knowledge and action, between recognition and willingness to respond. There is an unsettling symmetry here. Just as ecosystems lose redundancy before collapse, narratives lose nuance, stories simplify, complexity fades. What remains is easier to manage, but less truthful. The sixth extinction, if understood fully, would require a rethinking of progress itself. It would challenge assumptions embedded in governance, economics, and identity. Such challenges rarely succeed without disruption. Systems resist them quietly, and so the story continues to be told carefully, softened, fragmented, managed. The question that lingers beneath this management is not whether the truth will emerge. It always does, eventually. The question is whether emergence arrives in time to matter, or only in layers of stone, read by those who inherit the silence. Civilizations rarely fall in the way stories prefer. There is no single night when the lights go out everywhere at once, no universal signal that the balance has tipped. Instead, decline unfolds unevenly, region by region, generation by generation. Those living within it often experience not collapse, but adjustment. Life continues, narrower than before, until the narrowing itself becomes the defining condition. The archaeological record carries many such moments, quietly preserved beneath layers of sand and sediment. Societies that once appeared stable, even advanced, gradually lost their footing as environments shifted around them. Not through sudden catastrophe alone, but through accumulated strain. In ancient Mesopotamia, irrigation transformed arid land into agricultural abundance. Cities rose, writing emerged, trade networks expanded, yet the same irrigation slowly salinized the soil. Harvests declined, crops changed, political power centralized as resources tightened. Texts from the period do not describe an environmental collapse. They describe administrative reforms, religious unrest, military pressure. The deeper cause remained diffuse, absorbed into daily struggle. On Easter Island, forests disappeared over centuries. Statues still stood. Rituals continued. Social structures adapted. By the time the ecological limits were fully breached, the society was already reorganized around scarcity. Later, observers framed the collapse as sudden, but the evidence suggests a long accommodation to loss. The Maya lowlands tell a similar story. Drought cycles intensified, water management systems grew complex, cities persisted through stress. Then, gradually, inscriptions ceased. Population centres emptied unevenly. Some regions declined while others adapted longer. There was no single ending, only dispersal. What unites these cases is not environmental change alone, but delayed recognition of scale. Each society responded to immediate pressures with solutions that made sense locally. More canals, more terraces, more monuments. Each solution bought time. Each also deepened dependency on a system already under strain. These histories are often invoked as cautionary tales, but their most important lesson is subtle. Collapse did not arrive because people failed to respond. It arrived because responses were constrained by worldview. The underlying assumptions about growth, Order and permanence remained intact even as conditions changed. The present echoes this pattern with unsettling fidelity. Modern civilization responds to ecological strain with adaptation strategies designed to preserve existing structures. More efficient extraction, technological substitution, geoengineering proposals, conservation framed as optimization. These responses are rational within prevailing assumptions. They seek continuity. Deep time suggests that continuity is not always possible. In past extinctions, life did not adapt by preserving existing forms indefinitely. It reorganized after loss. Entire ecological architectures vanished. New ones emerged slowly. The transition was not gentle, nor was it negotiated. What distinguishes the present is scale and simultaneity. Environmental pressures are global. Cultural and economic systems are interconnected. There are no untouched frontiers to absorb displacement, no empty margins where decline can unfold unnoticed. Yet recognition remains fragmented. Economic indicators may rise even as ecosystems erode. Urban centres may thrive while rural systems degrade. Technological progress may accelerate while biodiversity collapses. These mixed signals create a sense of resilience that is difficult to interrogate. Collapse, when it arrives unevenly, can masquerade as transformation. Ancient societies did not perceive themselves as living through endings. They experienced stress, reform, conflict, adaptation. The narrative of collapse was written later by those standing outside the process. This distance allowed patterns to emerge. The present lacks that distance. We are embedded within feedback loops we struggle to see clearly. Data reveals trends, but lived experience filters them. Daily life continues, infrastructure functions, markets open. These signals suggest stability, even as underlying conditions deteriorate. There is also the matter of scale perception. Ancient collapses were regional. Their lessons feel distant, bounded. The sixth extinction is planetary. Its scope exceeds intuitive grasp. Humans evolved to respond to local threats, not global gradients. This mismatch between scale and perception creates a dangerous calm. As long as disruptions appear manageable, systemic risk remains abstract. Deep time warns that abstraction is not protection. The archaeological record also reveals something else. Societies under environmental stress often intensified symbolic activity. Monument building increased. Rituals became more elaborate. Identity was reinforced even as material conditions weakened. Meaning compensated for loss. Modern parallels are easy to find. Cultural production expands. Digital worlds grow richer as physical systems strain. Attention shifts inward, toward narratives of progress and innovation. These developments are not trivial. They shape how loss is experienced, interpreted, and deferred. The danger lies not in symbolism itself, but in its ability to mask material change. When meaning substitutes for function, fragility increases. Systems appear intact until they fail suddenly. The sixth extinction unfolds within this tension, between adaptation and acknowledgement, between response and recognition, between local solutions and global patterns. Ancient societies did not have the option of stepping outside their worldview. The present does, at least in theory. Knowledge of past collapses exists, data accumulates, comparisons are drawn. The question is whether this awareness alters trajectory, or merely enriches posthumous understanding. History does not repeat neatly, but it does rhyme. The lesson carried quietly through ruins and sediments is not one of inevitability, but of inertia. Systems persist beyond their viability because change threatens identity as much as comfort. Collapse is rarely chosen. It emerges from the refusal to imagine alternatives early enough. The sixth extinction is not waiting in the future. It unfolds alongside governance, trade, culture. It is not an interruption of civilization, but an expression of it under strain. The unresolved question, carried forward from every fallen society, lingers here as well. Is recognition, once achieved, sufficient to interrupt momentum, or does understanding arrive primarily to document what could not be stopped? Long before extinction was measured in percentages and models, it was remembered as story. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, similar images appear. A world drowned, a sky that darkened, a former age erased. Survivors carrying fragments of memory into something diminished and unfamiliar. These narratives are often dismissed as metaphor, as moral instruction, as myth. Yet their persistence suggests another function. They act as containers for ecological memory. In the absence of written science, ancient societies encoded environmental disruption into narrative. Flood myths, fire myths, age-ending cataclysms, not precise records, but emotional maps. They preserved the feeling of rupture even when detail faded. The message was not data, but warning. Geology now confirms that many of these stories likely correspond to real events. Rapid sea level rise after the last ice age submerged coastlines where early humans lived. Volcanic winters dimmed skies. Sudden climate shifts altered landscapes within generations. Memory survived where measurement could not. What is unsettling is how these myths often describe not just destruction, but forgetting. In many traditions, survivors emerge into a world that no longer remembers what came before. Knowledge is lost, skills diminish, the past becomes legend. This pattern mirrors what the archaeological record reveals repeatedly. Collapse is followed not only by loss of life, but by loss of complexity. Technologies regress, trade networks dissolve, cultural memory fractures. Extinction, in this sense, is not merely biological, it is epistemic. When ecosystems collapse, so do the knowledge systems built around them. Languages lose words for species that vanish, practices lose relevance, memory thins alongside biodiversity. The sixth extinction threatens this same erosion, though its pace makes it hard to perceive. Modern societies pride themselves on documentation, databases, archives, cloud storage. Nothing, it seems, need be forgotten. Yet documentation does not guarantee continuity of meaning. Knowledge requires context to remain alive. Without lived relationship to the natural world, information becomes inert. In past extinctions, myths served as continuity where systems failed. They preserved awareness of fragility, of cycles beyond human control. Today, those myths feel distant, symbolic. Yet the conditions that gave rise to them are reappearing, not as singular cataclysms, but as accumulation. The irony is sharp. Humanity now possesses unprecedented scientific insight into extinction dynamics. Models project futures with alarming clarity, yet this knowledge coexists with cultural amnesia. Daily life proceeds as if loss were abstract, deferred, manageable. Myth once carried what data could not. Now data struggles to carry what myth once held effortlessly, the emotional weight of irreversibility. Some scholars suggest that modern culture lacks adequate narrative for slow collapse. Apocalyptic stories dominate imagination, but gradual erosion resists dramatization. The sixth extinction does not resemble an ending from myth. It lacks spectacle, it lacks closure, it unfolds within routine. And yet mythic patterns persist beneath the surface. The idea of a lost golden age echoes through environmental discourse. So does the notion of punishment for excess, of imbalance corrected by force. These themes resurface not as belief, but as unease, a sense that something foundational has been violated. In ancient stories, the cause of destruction is often moralized. Humans anger gods. Boundaries are crossed. Balance is broken. While modern science rejects supernatural causality, the underlying intuition remains. Actions have consequences beyond intention. Systems respond without negotiation. What deep time adds to this intuition is scale. Consequences do not arrive proportionally. Small changes accumulate until thresholds are crossed, then response accelerates. The planet does not judge, it reacts. The myths also remind us of something else. Survival does not imply continuity. After the flood, the world is smaller. After the fire, knowledge is fragmented. Survivors inherit diminished inheritance. They rebuild without access to what was lost. This is the dimension of extinction rarely discussed. Not just what disappears, but what cannot be passed on. Languages already lose words for landscapes that no longer exist. Children grow up without encountering species once common. Baselines shift again. The absence becomes normal. Memory shortens. In this sense, the sixth extinction resembles the mythic endings more closely than scientific framing admits. Not because it will erase humanity entirely, but because it threatens continuity of relationship between people and place, between culture and ecology, between knowledge and experience. The future fossil record may capture the biological signature of this loss: plastic layers, carbon spikes, simplified faunas, but the loss of memory will not fossilize easily. It will be inferred from absence, from gaps in continuity, from the sudden narrowing of cultural reference. Ancient myths often end not with resolution, but with warning. They linger. They ask listeners to remember what cannot be restored. Their power lies not in prediction, but in preservation of awareness. The present moment sits awkwardly between myth and measurement. We know too much to rely on story alone, yet data has not replaced myth's ability to orient behaviour. Information accumulates faster than meaning. The sixth extinction challenges humanity to develop a narrative equal to its scale, not one of apocalypse nor one of reassurance, but one that can hold grief, responsibility, and uncertainty without collapse into denial. Whether such a narrative can emerge remains unclear. Past societies relied on myth because they had no alternative. The present has alternatives but struggles to integrate them. The ancient stories whisper across time not as prophecy, but as reminder. Endings are rarely recognized as such while they unfold. Memory fades quietly, knowledge thins. Survivors adapt to less without realizing what has been surrendered. The question carried forward from those myths is not whether collapse can be survived. It often is. The question is what kind of world survives, and what kind of memory it is capable of holding. There is comfort in believing that every problem carries within it the seed of its own solution. Technology has long been cast in this role, a quiet promise that whatever has been broken can be repaired, if only ingenuity moves fast enough. In the face of extinction, this promise becomes especially alluring. It reframes loss as a temporary imbalance. It suggests that time can be bought, systems optimized, consequences postponed. This belief is not without foundation. Tools have altered trajectories before. Medicine has reversed declines. Conservation has rescued species from the edge. Pollution controls have restored damaged ecosystems. These successes matter and they are real, yet they also carry an unintended effect. They nurture the expectation that intervention will always arrive in time. Deep time offers a more complicated picture. In previous extinctions, no corrective mechanism emerged mid-collapse. Life reorganized only after loss had fully expressed itself. Evolution did not intervene to preserve what existed. It experimented in the aftermath. The idea of rescue belongs to a species newly capable of imagining itself as caretaker. This imagination is powerful. It fuels innovation. It drives restoration efforts. It creates hope. But it also risks narrowing the frame. If technology is cast as saviour, the structures that generate loss remain intact. Extraction continues, buffered by efficiency. Growth persists, softened by mitigation. The sixth extinction unfolds within this buffering. Carbon capture promises to neutralize emissions without altering consumption. Synthetic biology offers substitutes for lost functions. Geoengineering proposals suggest that climate itself can be managed. Each approach carries potential, each also introduces new uncertainties. Interventions at planetary scale operate within systems not fully understood. History suggests caution. Large-scale technological solutions often produce secondary effects that surface later. Pesticides saved crops and erased insects. Dams generated power and disrupted river ecologies. Fossil fuels transformed civilization and destabilized climate. Each advance solved immediate problems, while creating longer arcs of consequence. The present moment differs only in magnitude. The faith placed in technological rescue reflects a deeper discomfort with limitation. To accept extinction as ongoing is to confront boundaries, ecological, ethical, temporal. Technology promises transcendence. It allows continuity without sacrifice, at least in theory. But deep time does not reward avoidance of limits. It responds to material conditions, not intention. Systems do not negotiate with narratives. They shift according to physics, chemistry, and feedback loops. Some thinkers argue that technology functions as delay rather than solution. It stretches the interval between cause and consequence, making trajectories harder to perceive. This delay can be useful if it enables transformation. It becomes dangerous if it merely preserves momentum. The challenge lies in distinguishing between the two. Conservation biology reveals this tension clearly. Protected areas slow biodiversity loss, but they cannot fully counteract climate-driven shifts. Assisted migration helps species track changing conditions, but it cannot recreate entire ecosystems. Gene editing may enhance resilience, but it cannot restore complexity once lost. These tools operate at the margins of a much larger system. What deep time reveals is that extinction is not simply the removal of species, but the collapse of relationships. Once interactions dissolve, restoration becomes exponentially harder. Reintroducing individual species does not reweave networks easily. Complexity resists assembly. Technology excels at manipulation, less so at integration. It can isolate variables, optimize functions, scale solutions. Living systems operate differently. They depend on context, redundancy, and histories that cannot be engineered quickly. This mismatch generates a quiet anxiety beneath technological optimism. Solutions multiply, yet the underlying trend persists. Emissions rise, habitats fragment, species disappear. Each solution buys time, but time alone does not guarantee reversal. There is also an ethical dimension rarely addressed directly. Technological intervention implies decision-making authority. Who decides which species are saved, which ecosystems prioritized, which futures pursued? These choices are shaped by power, funding, and values. They risk reproducing the same hierarchies that drove loss. In ancient extinctions, no such choices existed. Loss was indiscriminate. Today, selectivity becomes possible, even inevitable. This selectivity carries moral weight that systems are not designed to bear comfortably. The language of rescue also alters perception of urgency. If salvation is possible, then delay feels safer. Responsibility shifts to future innovation. Present restraint becomes optional. Deep time suggests that such deferral compounds risk. Thresholds crossed cannot always be uncrossed. This does not mean technology has no role. It means its role must be situated within a broader reckoning. Tools without transformation merely stabilize decline at a higher baseline of loss. The sixth extinction challenges humanity to reconsider not just how it intervenes, but why. Whether the goal is preservation of current systems or reconfiguration toward different values, whether continuity matters more than complexity. The fossil record will not distinguish between extinctions slowed by intention and those accelerated by neglect. It will record outcomes. Simplified ecosystems, altered chemistry, new assemblages of life. The question that remains unresolved is not whether technology can help. It already does. The question is whether it can substitute for restraint, humility, and reimagining of relationship with the living world. Deep time offers no examples where complexity was preserved through control alone. It survived through adaptation that respected limits, often enforced brutally. The present still has choice, but choice operates within narrowing corridors. Each year of delay reduces options. Each buffered response increases dependence on future correction. Technology whispers reassurance. Deep time remains silent. Between them lies the uncertainty of the present. Whether intervention becomes bridge or crutch, whether innovation enables transformation, or merely postpones recognition. The sixth extinction does not require a failure of tools. It requires only that tools be asked to carry more weight than they were ever designed to bear. Some losses never announce themselves at all. They occur below the threshold of attention, beneath the scale of what is usually counted. No headlines mark their passing. No photographs circulate. The world continues to look much the same, even as its foundations thin. This is the domain of invisible extinction, where disappearance unfolds without ceremony. Microorganisms, soil invertebrates, fungi, plankton. These forms of life shape the planet more profoundly than most visible species, yet they rarely enter public imagination. They regulate carbon. They cycle nutrients. They stitch ecosystems together through exchanges too small to see. When they falter, the effects ripple outward slowly, disguised as unrelated problems. The fossil record preserves little of this invisible world. Soft bodies dissolve. Microbial communities leave only chemical traces. Their extinctions must be inferred indirectly, from shifts in isotopes, from altered sediment chemistry, from sudden changes in larger life forms that depended on them. Even in deep time, much of this loss remains speculative. In the present, it is easier to ignore. Soils erode not just in volume, but in life. Industrial agriculture simplifies microbial diversity, favouring short-term yield over long-term resilience. Fertilizers replace relationships. Crops grow, but the living matrix beneath them weakens. The surface appears productive, while the system becomes increasingly dependent on external input. Oceans tell a parallel story. Phytoplankton, the base of marine food webs and a major regulator of atmospheric oxygen, respond sensitively to temperature and acidity. Shifts in their composition have been recorded across recent decades. Not collapse, but rearrangement. Certain species decline, others expand. The balance alters. These changes do not feel catastrophic. Fisheries may remain strong for a time. Waters may still shimmer with life. But deep time shows that such rearrangements often precede broader instability. When foundational organisms shift, everything above them adjusts, often unevenly. The extinction of the invisible carries a particular danger. It undermines feedback loops that would otherwise signal distress. Larger species decline later, sometimes suddenly, without obvious cause. By then, the root of the problem lies far beneath perception. Insects occupy an uneasy middle ground between visible and invisible. Their decline has been documented with growing concern, yet their absence is still often framed as anecdotal. Fewer insects on windshields, quieter summers. These observations lack precision, and so they are easy to dismiss. Yet they align with long-term studies showing steep reductions in biomass. In deep time, insect collapses often accompany ecological transitions. They respond quickly to habitat fragmentation, chemical exposure and climate shifts. Their loss destabilizes pollination, decomposition, and food webs simultaneously. The system frays from multiple points at once. What makes these losses difficult to confront is their subtlety. They do not challenge identity directly. Few people define themselves by microbes or beetles. Their absence does not disrupt daily narratives in obvious ways, and so concern remains abstract. The sixth extinction, in this sense, is not just about the disappearance of charismatic species. It is about the erosion of processes, the fading of interactions, the weakening of cycles that once operated reliably without notice. Deep time suggests that when these cycles fail, recovery is slow. Microbial communities evolve rapidly, but re-establishing stable networks takes time. Soils require centuries to rebuild complexity. Oceans take millennia to rebalance chemistry. The pace of loss far exceeds the pace of repair. There is also a psychological dimension to invisibility. Humans are attuned to movement, to sound, to size. Losses that occur silently and microscopically fail to trigger alarm. This mismatch between perception and consequence creates a dangerous lag. Ancient extinctions likely unfolded with similar invisibility. No one witnessed microbial collapse at the end of the Permian. No observer noted the precise moment when oxygen vanished from the seas. Life responded, but awareness did not exist to mark the transition. Today, awareness exists, but attention remains selective. Scientific papers describe shifts in microbial communities. Reports track soil health metrics, yet these findings circulate within specialized channels. They rarely translate into broader cultural concern. The story of extinction remains anchored to what can be named, photographed, mourned. This selective visibility shapes response. Conservation efforts prioritize species and landscapes that resonate emotionally. This is understandable. It is also incomplete. Saving what can be seen does not guarantee the survival of what sustains it. The invisible extinction also complicates timelines. Its effects accumulate slowly, then manifest abruptly. Crop yields fluctuate. Disease dynamics shift. Ecosystems cross thresholds without warning. These outcomes appear sudden, even though their causes stretched far into the past. Deep time offers a sobering reminder. By the time collapse becomes visible, the invisible groundwork has often already failed. Interventions arrive late, focused on symptoms rather than structure. The present still holds ambiguity. Invisible systems retain resilience. Not all decline leads to collapse. Complexity persists in unexpected ways, yet this uncertainty should not be mistaken for safety. It reflects incomplete understanding more than stability. The sixth extinction unfolds across layers of visibility. What is seen draws concern. What is unseen shapes outcome. The gap between them widens quietly. There is a particular sadness to this form of loss. It resists memorial. It leaves no clear absence to grieve. It simply alters the conditions of life, narrowing possibility without spectacle. Future records may capture this invisibility indirectly. Shifts in sediment chemistry, altered fossil assemblages, simplified ecosystems. The causes will be reconstructed with effort, inferred from fragments. Those living within the transition will remember it differently, if at all. They will recall surface changes, isolated crises, adaptations. The deeper loss will remain unnamed. The question that lingers within this quiet erosion is not whether invisible life matters. It always has. The question is whether a civilization attuned to immediacy can respond to loss that announces itself only after it has already reshaped the ground beneath its feet. Absence reshapes the future more quietly than presence ever could. There are things that will not be missed immediately, not because they were insignificant, but because their disappearance does not disrupt the surface of daily life. A plant with no common name, an insect seen only at dusk, a microbial lineage that stabilized soil chemistry without ever being noticed. When these vanish, nothing obvious collapses. Life continues, and so the loss passes without ceremony. What follows is not emptiness, but narrowing. Future generations will inherit a world that feels complete to them. They will learn its contours, its rhythms, its remaining abundance. What they will not feel is what is absent, because absence leaves no memory of itself. This is the most enduring legacy of extinction. Not the moment of loss, but the erasure of expectation. Shifting baselines operate not only across ecosystems but across time itself. Each generation recalibrates normality. What once would have been alarming becomes familiar. What would have been considered impoverished becomes sufficient. This recalibration is not conscious. It emerges through adaptation, through learning how to live within constraints that were not chosen. The fossil record hints at this phenomenon in indirect ways. After past extinctions, evolutionary radiations filled empty niches. Life returned in new forms. To those organisms, the world was whole. They did not mourn what came before. Complexity rebuilt slowly, but along different lines. What was lost remained lost. The sixth extinction threatens a similar inheritance, but with an added layer of awareness. Humans know, at least in principle, that something is being lost. Yet knowing does not guarantee remembrance. Memory requires continuity of experience. When continuity breaks, knowledge becomes abstract. Languages already offer early signs of this erosion. Words tied to landscapes, seasons, species fade as their referents disappear. Idioms lose grounding. Cultural practices detach from ecological context. Stories persist, but their meanings thin. In past societies, such thinning often preceded deeper rupture. As ecological foundations weakened, social complexity followed. Skills became irrelevant. Knowledge systems adapted to scarcity rather than abundance. What survived was not necessarily what had been most valuable, but what could be carried forward under constraint. The present differs in scale, not in pattern. Children growing up now may never experience certain migrations, sounds, textures of the living world. They will not miss them because they will not know to expect them. Education may describe what once existed, but description cannot replace encounter. Knowledge without relationship remains fragile. This has implications beyond ecology. Human imagination is shaped by what feels possible. When diversity narrows, so does imagination. Solutions are drawn from what is familiar. Futures are envisioned within reduced parameters. Loss becomes generative, not through creation, but through limitation. Deep time shows that after mass extinctions, recovery took millions of years. During that time, the planet hosted simpler ecosystems, fewer interactions, less redundancy. Evolution explored cautiously, constrained by the narrowness of surviving lineages. Complexity returned slowly, unevenly. If the present extinction continues, future humanity will inhabit such a simplified world. Not lifeless, but less forgiving, less buffered against change, more sensitive to disturbance. The absence of diversity will shape politics, economics, culture in ways difficult to anticipate. There is a quiet cruelty in this inheritance. Responsibility for loss rests largely with the present, while consequences unfold over centuries. Those who benefit least from extraction will live longest with its effects. Those not yet born will adapt without having chosen the conditions of adaptation. Past extinctions offer no guidance on justice. They simply show outcome. Life reorganizes. Survivors inherit. Memory resets. The difference now is the possibility of awareness extending across generations. Documentation exists. Records accumulate. Stories are told. Whether these will translate into lived memory remains uncertain. Archives preserve information, but not relationship. There is also the risk of romanticizing what is lost. Future generations may imagine a richer past without fully understanding its complexity. Nostalgia replaces knowledge. Loss becomes aesthetic rather than material. This too narrows response. Deep time does not romanticize. It records transitions without sentiment. The stone carries no preference for what survives. It reflects what endured long enough to leave a trace. The sixth extinction, if completed, will leave a trace shaped by plastic, carbon, simplified biotas. Future analysts may reconstruct the sequence with precision. They may understand mechanisms better than those who lived through it. What they will not access is the texture of loss as it unfolded quietly, normalized, absorbed. The present moment carries a fragile opportunity to preserve not just species but memory of abundance, to resist normalization of absence, to hold open the idea that what is disappearing matters even if it is not missed yet. This is not a call to restore an impossible past. Deep time makes clear that restoration in full is not how life works. It is a call to recognize inheritance before it hardens into baseline, to acknowledge that future limits are being set now, often without debate. Absence shapes identity subtly. It defines what questions are asked, what solutions are imagined, what futures feel plausible. The narrowing of the living world narrows the human one alongside it. The question that lingers here is not whether future generations will survive. Life is persistent. Humanity is adaptable. The question is what kind of world survival will occur within, and whether those inheriting it will ever know that something vast, intricate, and irreplaceable once surrounded them. Civilizations do not end when the last structure falls. They end earlier, in the quiet narrowing of options, in the moment when continuity becomes dependent on conditions that no longer exist. Long before ruins appear, the future has already been edited. In the deep past, mass extinctions reset the rules of life without intention. The planet reorganized brutally, indifferent to what was lost. What followed was not restoration, but replacement. New forms filled emptied niches. Complexity returned slowly, after long intervals of simplicity and instability. There was no memory carried forward, only inheritance shaped by survival. The present moment invites a different possibility, one that history has never tested. A reset not triggered by asteroid or flood, but by accumulation. A reconfiguration of civilization driven not by sudden collapse, but by the slow exhaustion of ecological margins. Some scholars describe this as a soft reset. Not an ending, but a narrowing. Energy becomes more expensive. Food systems become more fragile. Climate variability increases. Political structures strain under resource pressure. None of this requires total collapse. Life continues, but within tighter constraints. Deep time suggests that such narrowing often precedes more abrupt change. Systems under stress become sensitive to disturbance. Small shocks produce outsized effects. Stability becomes temporary, negotiated moment by moment. The idea of a reset unsettles because it challenges linear narratives of progress. It suggests that advancement is reversible, not morally, but materially. The complexity requires conditions to persist. When those conditions erode, complexity follows. Past civilizations experienced this truth without the language to articulate it. They adapted until adaptation itself failed. The present has language, models, foresight. Whether foresight alters trajectory remains uncertain. There is a temptation to imagine reset as catastrophe, a dramatic rupture that clears the slate. This image dominates fiction and fear alike. But history offers a quieter version. Systems degrade unevenly. Infrastructure persists beyond usefulness. Institutions continue operating as their foundations weaken. Life reorganizes gradually. In such transitions, power concentrates. Inequality sharpens. Access to resources defines survival more than ingenuity. These patterns repeat across collapsed societies. The ecological and the social entwine. The sixth extinction intersects with this process. Biodiversity loss reduces resilience. Climate instability amplifies uncertainty. Together, they create conditions where continuity becomes expensive. Maintaining current systems requires increasing effort, energy, intervention. This is the texture of reset while unfolding. Not everyone experiences it equally. Some regions adapt with technology and wealth. Others absorb the cost directly. Migration increases, conflict simmers. These responses are often framed as political or economic crises, detached from ecological context. Deep time suggests this detachment is illusory. In earlier extinctions, there was no choice. Life responded as physics demanded. Now choice exists in theory, but it is constrained by momentum. Systems built for expansion resist contraction. Identities shaped by growth struggle with limits. The question becomes whether reset can be guided rather than imposed. Some propose deliberate simplification, degrowth, rewilding, local resilience. These ideas challenge dominant assumptions and face resistance. They ask societies to choose less before less is forced upon them. Deep time offers no examples of voluntary simplification at planetary scale, but it also offers no examples of infinite growth. Others place faith in managed transition, gradual decarbonisation, technological substitution, optimization. These approaches aim to preserve structure while altering inputs. Their success depends on speed, coordination, and restraint, qualities not historically associated with large systems under stress. The possibility remains that reset will not be chosen, but inherited. Future societies may look back on this period as a threshold, not because everything ended, but because trajectories converged. Ecological loss limited options. Social systems adapted accordingly. What followed felt normal to those within it, even if it appeared diminished from a distance. This is the most unsettling aspect of reset. It does not announce itself as failure. It presents as adaptation. Life finds a way, but not necessarily the one imagined. Deep time records many such transitions, periods of richness followed by long intervals of austerity. Recovery measured not in years, but in epochs. Life persisted, but differently. The present still holds uncertainty. The sixth extinction is not yet complete. Systems retain resilience. Diversity remains. The corridor has narrowed, but it has not closed. Whether it will depends on decisions unfolding quietly, embedded in policy, consumption, values. Reset in this context is not a singular event waiting ahead. It is already in motion, distributed across choices too ordinary to feel historic. Each accommodation to loss, each acceptance of reduced abundance, shapes the baseline of what follows. There is a subtle ethical weight here, not of blame, but of inheritance. What is passed forward will shape imagination for centuries. Futures will be built from what remains, not from what was possible. The deep past offers one final unsettling lesson. After mass extinctions, recovery favoured simplicity. Systems became less complex before complexity returned. This was not punishment, it was consequence. The present can still influence which forms of simplicity emerge, whether they are violent or cooperative, whether memory is preserved or erased, whether loss is compounded or stabilized. The question that lingers at this edge of reset is not whether civilization will continue. It almost certainly will in some form. The question is what kind of civilization emerges from a world where abundance is thinned, where silence is spread unevenly, and where the memory of what was possible fades faster than the stone that will one day record its passing. There are moments in history that never feel like moments at all. They stretch, they thin, they pass through ordinary days unnoticed, leaving behind a shape that is only visible once distance has been gained. Those living inside them rarely agree on what is happening. They sense change but struggle to name it. They feel unease without climax, meaning lags behind experience. The sixth extinction belongs to this kind of time. It does not arrive as an ending, but as a long, quiet rearrangement. A subtle rewriting of what is possible. Species fade, systems simplify, relationships dissolve. Life continues, but along narrower paths. The planet does not stop, it adjusts. Deep time offers no comfort in final answers. It records transitions without commentary. It shows that extinction is not the opposite of life, but one of its recurring conditions. Loss clears space. New forms emerge, yet what is lost does not return. The memory of it survives only if carried forward deliberately. What distinguishes the present is not that extinction is occurring, but that it is being observed while unfolding. Awareness exists alongside momentum. Knowledge accumulates even as trajectories persist. This coexistence creates tension rather than resolution. Some respond by seeking certainty, timelines, thresholds, points of no return. Others retreat into abstraction, framing loss as statistical inevitability. Still others hold tightly to hope, emphasizing resilience and adaptation. Each response captures part of the truth. None contain it fully. The reality is less decisive, more fragile. The sixth extinction is neither complete nor unreal. It is partial, uneven, ongoing. It does not demand belief. It reveals itself through accumulation, through the thinning of complexity, through the quiet normalization of absence. Deep time suggests that recognition does not guarantee interruption. Past transitions unfolded regardless of awareness, but awareness does alter how transitions are remembered, and perhaps how they are shaped at the margins. This is where the present remains unresolved, not at the level of species counts or climate models, but at the level of relationship, between humanity and the living systems that sustain it, between knowledge and action, between inheritance and responsibility. Extinction, when framed solely as loss of life, invites despair. When framed as reset, it risks detachment. But when understood as narrowing of futures, it reveals its most intimate dimension. It defines what can still be imagined. The narrowing is not uniform. Pockets of abundance remain. Complexity persists unevenly. The future is not sealed, yet the direction of pressure is clear. Without intervention at the level of structure rather than symptom, momentum favours simplification. Deep time records many worlds simpler than this one. Worlds where life persisted, but with fewer voices, fewer interactions, fewer buffers against change. They were not empty worlds, they were quieter. Whether the present becomes another such chapter is not yet written in stone. The record remains open, layer by layer. Decisions unfold quietly, embedded in systems that resist pause. Each year adds thickness to the stratum of now. There is no final warning in deep time, no moral carved into rock, only pattern. Life tends toward complexity when conditions allow. It retreats when they do not. It experiments endlessly within constraint. The sixth extinction, if allowed to proceed unchecked, will be remembered not as a failure of intention, but as a failure of restraint. Yet restraint itself is not guaranteed by knowledge. It requires cultural transformation, not just technological correction. It asks societies to redefine success away from accumulation toward continuity. Such shifts have no precedent at planetary scale. Still, the absence of precedent does not imply impossibility. It implies uncertainty. The most unsettling aspect of this moment is not the scale of loss, but the quiet with which it unfolds. No singular event will announce that the threshold has been crossed. The transition will feel gradual until it feels irreversible, and by then it will simply be the world. Deep time teaches patience, not optimism. It shows that life endures, but not always in forms that favour those who precipitate change. Survivors inherit what remains, not what was intended. The sixth extinction invites a final, unresolved question. Not whether humanity will survive, but what kind of participant it chooses to be within the living system it alters. Whether it remains a force that simplifies, or becomes one that stabilizes complexity even at cost to itself. There is no answer waiting ahead, only a narrowing present, carrying both possibility and loss. The stone will one day record what follows. Whether it reads as interruption or inevitability depends on what is done within this thin, fragile layer of time. For now, the planet continues, quietly, patiently, holding the outcome open just a little longer, in the way it always has.